tonight's Chicago story, Dutton's Law.
634, he's bound on 7th. I will assist. I can pick him up in about 3 blocks.
10-4, 634.
Missing evidence and intimidated witnesses complicate a murder in Chicago Story tonight at 9:25 on BBC1.
On BBC Two shortly, there's another episode of Butterflies with Wendy Craig and Geoffrey Palmer. This is BBC One. And now the 9 o'clock news with John Humphreys.
The hospital strike gets its biggest backing yet. Thousands are out on the picket lines. The health minister replaces 3 area chiefs who support the health workers. Mr. Foote gets his way over the militants, but they say the fight's not over yet. Mrs. Thatcher tells the UN it's our right to defend liberty. And the hunt widens for the police killer who may have struck again. Good evening. It's been the biggest strike so far in support of the health workers' pay claim. Scores of thousands of men and women have left their jobs in sympathy. And the health minister has replaced 3 regional health authority chairmen who backed the health workers. Throughout the day, miners, seamen, dockers, teachers, steel, water, gas and council workers joined picket lines across the country. Nearly 50 pits were shut down. Striking ambulancemen in parts of Scotland and Durham withdrew even emergency cover. The Public Employees Union claims 1,800 hospitals were disrupted. The Health Minister, Norman Fowler, told the Commons he deplored the strikes, and he warned they won't force us into providing more money. The sooner that's taken on board, the better. But his statement brought an angry response from the opposition's Bruce Millen, who said the chaos and disruption was being caused by Mr. Fowler's own pig-headed, maladroit and provocative behaviour.
Well, tonight the government, in the person of the Health Minister, Mr. Norman Fowler, is heading for a political storm over its appointment of the chairman of the country's 14 regional health authorities. They're appointed every 4 years, and this time the government has replaced 6 of them. That's partly because of age and illness, but at least 2 of them are claiming they've been sacked because they've been too sympathetic to the union's views. They're Sir David Perris, the chairman of the West Midlands Authority, and Mr. Kingsley Williams of Wessex. He had this to say.
Well, in the past, my criticism has been private for them, but as they've decided that they don't want the advice further, I feel free to answer that question. It's on 2 fronts. Firstly, on the very difficult one of pay at the moment, and then there are a number of other general issues with regard to the health service, which makes me fear for the future of the health service generally.
In what way fear for the future of the National Health Service?
Well, I fear that it's likely to become, if present policies are pursued, a service for the very old, very young, accident emergency, almost standby only, and which is not the sort of health service that we've been used to in this country up to now, and reflects much more the American experience, which I don't like.
Well, that row is an unwelcome one for Mr. Fowler, who insists that it's important to bring in new people with suitable experience and background. And Mr. Fowler's also finding that the new pay offer, 6% for ancillary workers, 7.5% for nurses, isn't proving immediately popular. Even the Royal College of Nursing was insisting today that it had not yet accepted it. And a spokeswoman said it was not a foregone conclusion, it would be accepted if put out for local voting. Feelings were still running high. In London, hundreds of demonstrators were joined by other trade unionists as they marched past the Labour Party's headquarters. The TUC's given wholehearted backing to the health workers and agreed the unions should be asked to give further support. And in London, as in many other parts of the country, pickets manned lines outside hospitals, although there was no attempt to stop patients actually crossing the lines. Despite the laws governing secondary picketing, some of the pickets on duty were from unions outside the health service.
In the north, the police dealt with emergency patients in County Durham, where all ambulances were off the road. In this incident, a woman suffering from kidney failure was rushed to hospital after a 999 call. And on the picket lines, there was support from miners for health workers outside Sunderland hospitals. But weren't the miners flouting the secondary picketing regulations?
Yes, that's a fact of life, that, yes, but we ignore that.
Are you expecting any trouble because of that?
No, I think the government and the police don't want any trouble. They'll not take us on.
Other groups turning out to back the strike included shipyard workers and engineers. And at one South Shields hospital, councillors from the Labour-controlled local authority joined the pickets.
Well, I mean, we are elected as Labour members and we are elected to represent working people, and I don't see how you can dissociate disputes like this away from the general struggle for working people to improve their standards of living.
In Nottinghamshire, nurses from Newpie headed miners' pickets trying to enforce the NUM call to halt production in support of health workers. Although the NUM call wasn't an instruction, it was enough to close half the county's 25 pits. At Linby Colliery, closed by today's action, 2 nurses approached the few NUM members who did turn up for work.
Morning. Morning. Are you going in this morning, brother?
No, then. Are you going to accept that rise today?
No.
Good enough then, Doc.
No, we're not.
Thank you.
We're staying out for 12%, the full claim.
Well, that's the lot, is it?
Yes.
Yes.
We're staying out for the full claim, we are.
How do you feel as a nurse, traditionally regarded as a moderate profession, possibly breaking the law by being here?
I'm not particularly worried about breaking the law at all.
Why not?
Because I'm not. Because I feel very strongly about it on behalf of the other workers in the National Health Service.
Do you think that
the members I'm supporting today?
Do you feel, in other words, that your pay claim transcends any consideration of the law of the land?
No, but I think that the law of the land should be a little bit more sympathetic towards the National Health Service worker.
Well, the size of the picketing has been embarrassing for the government, and although ministers and Mr Len Murray are carefully not available for comment, there's little doubt it is against Mr Pryor's 1980 Employment Act. That set a limit of 6 pickets, though it is up to police to make the final decision. And it also made secondary picketing actionable. But the Whitehall view is that the Act wasn't really directed against one-day actions, and it's unlikely employers will think it worthwhile suing. So there's no sign of the action fading away in spite of the increased offer. Indeed, the TUC Health Services Committee meets in the morning to decide on further action. And its chairman, Mr Albert Spanswick, said tonight they wanted to escalate. He said they wanted more support, both money and action, from other unions, and would be setting that out in a special letter sent to the TUC.
Sir Peter Parker has suggested that British Rail may break its agreement with the trade unions over the closed shop. He's told railway workers that if they don't strike next week, they'll keep their jobs, even if they lose their trade union membership. The strike's due to start next Monday. Sir Peter has sent a personal letter to every one of the workers saying it is now 1 minute to midnight. Unless common sense from ordinary railwaymen takes over, the railways are due to start the most disastrous strike in their history. Our Labour correspondent says the NUR executive will be meeting in the morning, and there are hopes that it may reach a compromise with British Rail over guards, which could avert the strike. Labour's leader Michael Foot has won the battle over what to do about the extreme left group militant tendency, which he's described as a secret conspiracy. The party's national executive, at a lengthy meeting, voted to accept last week's inquiry report, urging that a register be set up of approved organisations within the party. The report had said that militant tendency in its present form would not get on that register. Voting today was 16 to 10 in favour of the report, but the whole issue will be hotly debated at the Labour conference in the autumn. Our political editor John Cole reporting.
The militant tendency's been given 3 months to get on side. If it doesn't, Michael Foot has the votes at Blackpool to begin disciplinary measures against what he calls a secret conspiracy. Today's meeting was fundamental to the way Labour will comport itself between now and the election. There's deep disagreement between the left, who believe the party will prosper electorally if it concentrates on its radical policies, and the centre-right, who think many Labour voters will turn their backs unless extremist groups are dealt with. Today's decision came because Mr Foot and those who vote with him have joined the second group. Some on the right think Labour must now get rid of its militant parliamentary candidates. But when executive members emerged, the divided views which kept the debate going nearly 3 hours were evident.
Are you happy with the result of this meeting?
Delighted.
Can you tell us more about it? No.
People who continue to support those organisations, or in this specific case, and I hope it might be the only case, the militant organisation, and therefore its separate and distinctive propaganda and so on, will have to make the choice between continuing their participation in that and belonging to the Labour Party.
Well, it's a sad day for the Labour Party because it means that attention is going to be diverted away from the real task, and that's confronting the Thatcher government and the Liberals and the Social Democrats, our real and natural enemies, and there's going to be time and energy drained away from that course of action, which is the one that the Labour Party should be following.
It will lead to a witch
Well, they'll try, but it won't work.
Do you
so
think
I would
it'll
say
lead
to people,
inevitably to expulsion?
well, I think the people who moved it will hope it leads to expulsions, but it won't succeed. And so I'd say to people at home, particularly good Labour people, don't worry. They got rid of Cripps and Bevan and Foot, they all came back. And if they get rid of anybody this time, they'll all be back. So don't worry.
The job of implementing the report is first item on the agenda of the new General Secretary, Jim Mortimer. He's the former head of ECAS and by nature a conciliator. Mr Mortimer says he doesn't want to wield an axe, but to get people to behave themselves. Labour today took the first step to try to make sure they do.
The Prime Minister, in a speech to the United Nations today, said that Britain had a right and a duty to defend its own people whenever and wherever their liberty is challenged. Mrs Thatcher was speaking at the UN's special session on disarmament, just over a week after the ceasefire in the Falklands. It was her first address to the Assembly, the high point of a busy 24 hours in the United States. Later tonight, she's meeting President Reagan at the White House. A report from Martin Bell.
She was here for a speech on disarmament, but the visit inevitably had a strong Falklands flavour to it. Outside the UN, Argentines made common cause with the Irish in their usual picket of a visiting British leader. Inside, Mrs Thatcher was assured of an attentive audience in a day which included 7 interviews, 2 news conferences, a speech and a visit to the White House. But first there was a meeting with the UN Secretary-General, Mr Perez de Cuellar, who had tried and failed to find a Falklands settlement. She told him of the position on the ground in the islands and of her intention not to negotiate any more, except with the islanders themselves. The speech didn't mention the Falklands directly, but the references were clear. Wars, she said, were not caused by the arms race, but by the ambitions of aggressive nations. The delegation from Argentina was not in place to hear her.
Mr. President, the message I bring is practical and realistic. It's the message of a country determined to preserve and spread the values by which we live. We believe that wars are caused not by armaments, but by the ambitions of aggressors, and that what tempts them is the prospect of easy advantage and quick victory. We believe that the best safeguard of peace lies not only in a just cause, but in secure defense. We believe we have a right and a duty to defend our own people whenever and wherever their liberty is challenged.
Mrs Thatcher drew a good ovation from a chamber much fuller than for most General Assembly speakers. She then returned more directly to the Falkland Islands issue at a news conference attended by many Latin American journalists. There were critical questions about British compliance with UN resolutions.
The fundamental point, the Security Council resolution had 3 points: cessation of hostilities, withdrawal of the Argentine troops, negotiations. The withdrawal of the Argentine troops was never honoured, never. Now, if you have a 3-legged stool, it cannot stand on 2 legs.
From the UN, Mrs Thatcher goes now to the White House for talks about the future of the islands and their defence.
I think at the moment the Falkland Islands look to us for their defence, and they will for certainly several months to come and possibly longer.
So Britain's really on her own in this for the foreseeable future?
Well, I think certainly for quite a time. There's so much to be done in practical terms to rehabilitate the people and to reconstruct the islands. You and I have never been occupied. We don't know what it's like. It's a traumatic experience. And so we'll have to come out of it gently and then do a good deal of development of the life on the islands.
So Argentina, through the invasion, has really forfeited its right to talk about sovereignty. You think that's...
I don't know that she will stop talking about sovereignty. What I'm saying is the only context in which we talk about sovereignty is in discussion with the Falkland Islanders and what they want, and that is always the view that we've taken.
And this has been Mrs. Thatcher's attitude throughout. She's come here on the crest of a military victory. She's taken an extremely hard line. And at the White House tonight, she isn't expecting even to be asked to compromise on sovereignty for the Falklands.
The 3 British journalists held on spying charges in Argentina are to be released on bail next Monday. A judge will decide then whether they can go home to see their families. Simon Winchester of the Sunday Times and Ian Mather and Tony Prime of the Observer have been prisoners since mid-April. Bail was set at £4,000 each. Tonight, Ian Mather's wife Margaret said that after so many weeks of uncertainty, she would believe her husband was free only when she saw him. The governor of the Falklands, Rex Hunt, is on his way back to the islands, nearly 3 months after he was thrown out by the Argentine invaders. Mr. Hunt has a new title. He'll be the island's civil commissioner, and he says his top priority will be getting life back to normal after the war. Francis Coverdale asked him what he thought about going back.
Well, great. I'm most grateful to the military and to Mrs. Thatcher for getting the Argentines off and restoring British administration.
What are you looking forward to most?
Hoisting my flag outside Government House and seeing my taxi with Don there, my driver, waiting to meet me.
That's the first thing you'll do, is it?
So the first thing I'll do is to shake General Moore by the hand and thank him for retaking the Falkland Islands.
The latest ceasefire in Lebanon has broken down after less than 12 hours. The British government has warned the 2,000 British citizens there that tomorrow is their last chance to leave. Tonight, the container ship, the Royal Prince, which has been requisitioned, is sailing from Cyprus to pick them up at Junia. Meanwhile, there's heavy fighting near Karun Lake and up the Bekaa Valley. The Israelis have rejected a call by Palestinians in Beirut for a disengagement. Bill Hamilton reports.
At the least sign of Palestinian fire, these Israeli soldiers train their big guns on West Beirut. Sometimes for hours at a time, Beirut is quite simply a city under siege.